Brian Odhiambo, 2 months and 7 days, has been missing. We don't know where he is. We do not know if he's dead or alive, but it's necessary for us to say his name. He disappeared in very unclear circumstances in terms of what happened, and he represents tens of other Kenyans who we cannot find. Mukuria comes into mind as well. His mother still does not know where he is. He went missing on the 25th of June. She still does not know if he's dead or alive. Again, represents a number of Kenyans who go missing, who've been disappeared, who've been killed extrajudicially. We do not know where they are. And to secure rights of those who remain alive, who feel the need to open their mouths, we continue to have these conversations. And those are some of the things that we do on this show every day. We'll get into a rights conversation this hour, and I'll let you know who our guest is in just a bit. But that's something to think about. Now, there are education conversations that take place, Dennis, and what are some of the things that we talk about when it comes to platforms for folks?
We talked about the pathway that Alex gives you, and through sponsorship and scholarships that you get for you to get there. But let's just talk about some of the institutions that you get to go to, because we could talk about global universities. And these, imagine studying at institutions like Vanderbilt University, Macalester College, Patton University, Hamilton College, Bates College, Tufts University, UC Berkeley, or the University of Chicago. And this is just but a glimpse, because we have many other universities that you can join through the ALX platform. Now, these are just a few of the university partners you get through ALX, and ALX is a pathway that opens doors for young Kenyan high school graduates to be able to join these universities, global universities that are doing really, really well. And for detailed information, how you will get here, you go to www.alexafrica.com/join-pathway. That right there gets you to these global universities. You get to do what it is you love.
Asante sana. Fantastic and great for that. Thank you very much. We're talking about rights this morning. There have been too many a conversation around what is happening and how people have disappeared. We don't know what's going on with them. That somebody can open their mouth on what is new media today, social media, in whatever shape or form that takes, and then they don't know if they're going to wake up tomorrow morning. We saw the devastating position of a young woman last week who is a big social media blogger. She made a post last week, or the week before last, and then she disappeared for 4 days and then showed up with severe bodily harm and, terrible injuries. And the question is, where are our rights? And that's the conversation that we have this morning. Kenya at crossroads on its human rights situation. Wallace Ndero is here with us, and he is a research and advocacy advisor for the Defenders Coalition. Wallace, a happy Situation Room welcome to you.
Thank you very much for having me here this morning. Very grateful to be part of this conversation, which is very important and pertinent. As you highlighted earlier, we have a crisis, so to speak, in this country in terms of human rights violations and freedoms. So glad to be here to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for honoring that invitation. And even as we do, C.T. Muga goes around the continent every week. He comes in, as you must know, with a proverb from a different country.
Yes, he does.
And he's going to share where we are this week, and he'll share the proverb, and of course we'll ask you to interpret that.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Super.
Great.
Yes.
Great.
We are still in the coup belt, but this time around, the thing I want to point out is we are in the Sahel. Now, the Sahel region in this continent refers to a place which, if you're polite, you'd say it's semi-arid. If you're to be honest, you'd say it's predominantly arid. And the country from whence we get our proverb this week are in that region. Close to 90% of the land mass is part of the Sahara Desert. Nonetheless, it is a country rich in minerals. Rich. It's a country rich in culture. It has an interesting mixture of Berber and Arab communities who intermarried. They form communities that, as I said, very unique. But apart from just being in the coup belt, it also represents the tragedy of Africa in the sense that African countries are rich in minerals and it has some of the poorest people on the planet. This country is one of the poorest countries on the continent. And if you're one of the poorest countries in the continent, you're also one of the poorest countries in the world. They are poor countries, but we do well with our poverty. We rank very, very highly in our poverty. It's the 11th largest country in Africa and 28th largest country in the world. Population isn't that big, just around 4.3 million. The proverb. If you watch your pot, your food will not burn. Now, I clarified in the previous hour that the pot I refer to here is not your belly. I am referring to the cooking vessel. Yeah. Yes, if you watch it, your food will not burn. What do you think of the proverb and what do you think it means?
I think to me it means that if you are wary of a situation, you can be able to, say, for example, be averting maybe a disaster, for example. If I give it, this could apply, of course, in our daily lives, where we are conscious of our environments, we are conscious of our surroundings. So in that particular scenario, then if anything was to happen, you'll be able to respond very quickly. Because when you're cooking, mostly we just, especially tea, for example, if you just turn away for a minute, for a second, it will boil over and spill. But if you're looking at that particular tea, cooking all through, it will not spill, it will not spill over. So I think for me, the proverb means that we need to be very aware of our situations, aware of our circumstances, and be able to take appropriate actions where necessary. Yeah.
It's interesting when you talk about milk and water and tea, because water on its own will bubble and boil, but it won't really spill.
No.
But you put tea leaves, spills. You add milk, it spills. But your point is very well made. Thank you.
Indeed.
Yeah, thank you
It
very
is
much.
quite. So, there are too many stories.
Yes.
In 2025, I mean, I'm not even going to talk about 2024 and beyond that.
Yeah.
Already in 2025, we're in the third month of the year, and there are too many stories about folks who've opened their mouth to then be able to express themselves freely, and then have either died or disappeared. That's the thing.
Yeah.
That there are people. Too many, and in my opinion, one is too many.
One is too many.
One is too many of an individual who says something and then turns up, beaten within an inch of their life, or that actually died.
Yeah.
And this is where we are. Are we at a crossroads when it comes to the human rights situation in the country? And I'm going to also then point out the fact that, you had visiting royals last week who made statements, and one of the things that they did bring out was human rights.
Yeah.
So where is Kenya with the human rights situation today?
Thank you very much. So where we are right now currently in this country, in terms of human rights, we are doing poorly. We're doing terribly. We are not adhering to our constitution, which provides for our rights in Chapter 4. We are not adhering to a lot of regional, international instruments which we ratified as a country. And the reason why we can say Kenya is at a crossroads is, one, Kenya is currently an elected member of the Human Rights Council, and they'll be in the council for the next 3 years. And the reason why we're saying we're at a crossroads is because now Kenya has to make a very important decision regarding human rights situation internally. And when we do an introspection of ourselves, we'll be able to appreciate that we are not doing well. One of the criterias which are usually used by the General Assembly during the election of members to the Human Rights Council, they usually elect from the 105 members of the UN. They usually look into the candidates, human rights track record and his commitment to human rights. And so if we're being very honest, and when Kenya came up for candidature and was elected to the council, then the question will be, did they actually look into the country's human rights situation? Have we actually made commitments to safeguard rights and freedoms of this country? And have we taken appropriate measures to do so? The answer to that question to me will be a no, because when you look at what has been highlighted just earlier on during the commencement of this conversation, we appreciate we're doing very poorly. When you have people being disappeared, their rights are being violated. When you have people's bodies being found in thickets and bushes and rivers, people's rights are being violated. So as a country, we cannot be then the ones to be mandated to promote human rights on a global scale while we ourselves are doing significantly very poorly. And that's the challenge that we have. So the crossroads is Kenya ready and willing, being on the seat of the council, to be able now to right its wrong in terms of ensuring rights are safeguarded, freedoms are ensured, and Kenyans can actually be able to exist in a space where they don't have any fear. posting on social media right now, for example, leads to a violation of the right to expression, but also leads to another, violation of other rights. Article 29 talks about you cannot, freedom from torture, inhumane, degrading treatment, and how many of these Kenyans are actually going through that? The lady you mentioned earlier, Article 29 for her clearly was violated beyond the other articles we could make reference to. So Kenya has to make a decision. That's why we're at a crossroads in terms of, are we now ready to do a proper introspection of ourselves? Are we ready to call ourselves for a small meeting like we usually say and appreciate where we are in terms of our human rights track record? Are we doing well? And if we're not doing well, how can we better it?
Can I ask this question?
Yes.
Human rights, there is clearly a bar that we use to measure.
Yes.
And that bar is what leads us to look at the track record of a country as represented by the people in leadership.
Yeah.
That brings us to the word crisis. So human rights and the progression towards achieving it is aspirational.
Yes.
Okay, now, what measure then do we use when we say we are in a crisis? Because I'm asking this question in this respect. Even as we look at rights of individuals being abrogated, what about the freedoms that people still have despite? Because if you give the example of our country, one could argue that it's in the attempt to express these freedoms that we see the abrogation of the same freedoms. And so on a scale of 1 to 10, if you look at, if I can give it a quantum, the expressions that we see of freedoms of right from different players vis-a-vis the negative response and reaction that amounts to a violation of these rights, which one weighs heavier?
No, I think that's a very good question, because then when it comes to human rights and fundamental freedoms, right, the measure usually is how well are they being implemented in the country, and especially when it comes to progression and applicability of that mostly before socio-economic rights, and that's why we appreciate they usually implemented progressively. But again, also the question then will be, you may have it on paper, but how is it effective in your country? And I'm positive right now, if we were to take the Constitution and go article per article, we'll be able to appreciate the violations that occur in it, right? You have laws in place, you have a constitution in place, you have treaties and regional instruments, and you have ratified. Then the question is, are the people in your country being able to enjoy these rights fully? That would be one. Secondly, and if there is any violation of these particular rights, are there any redress mechanisms to be able to address these particular rights? And if there are none, then, or probably they are very limited, then the concern will be, then we can say there's a very serious situation in that particular country regarding human rights. When you look at how countries are categorized in terms of enjoyment of rights, Kenya is country categorized as obstructed in terms of people being able to enjoy their rights and freedoms. Obstructed, why? Because you have in place, our constitution it's deemed to be one of the most progressive ones in the continent, right? And chapter 4 is very clear. But now there are very many blockades along the way, which will now bar Kenyans from being able to enjoy these rights and freedoms. So in as much as we have rights, the question then will be, are people enjoying them? That's the question. And if they are they doing it fully? And if they are doing it fully, then we are good to go. But every single time we are going to be looking at the country in itself, and reports will be made, right? If we go, for example, to the Kenya National Commission Human Rights website, we'll be able to get a lot of reports which document violation of rights and freedoms of people. So to answer your question is, they are there, yes, but are they being enjoyed fully by the people? And if the answer is in the negative, then that's a situation we need to be able to address holistically.
So the situation that you speak to pretty much is where the constitution of the land gives the populace right, those that they should enjoy, rightfully so. But then again, there is now the implementation aspect of these rights and making sure that they citizens operate in them and enjoy them is where the problem is at. Because if we talk about freedom to expression, that is a right given by the Constitution. But when you say you are, so it is the implementing body in making sure that these rights are enjoyed, that is failing at it. So then if that is the situation, we know that is the problem. What needs to be done? And from the Defenders Coalition, part of this civil rights group, what is the conversation that perhaps you're having, and what has been the response?
So one of the things you're right in terms of implementation, right? And of course, the duty of this, ensuring these rights are safeguarded is usually to the state, and then the state will trickle it down to the other organs which they'll work with to ensure that these rights are actually safeguarded. But again, also what we're doing in terms of ensuring these rights and freedoms are safeguarded is doing a lot of advocacy around ensuring that, one, there's accountability for violation of rights and freedoms. We appreciate that we fall short in terms of accountability, and a good example is what happened last year during the protests. We have not seen people being held accountable for their action, especially for questions on police brutality, as well as people who sustained a lot of injuries, people who are killed. The other thing we look at is, do we have, we push for the strengthening of existing mechanisms to be able to be utilized for defending these rights, right? When you talk about institutions in place, are they effective, for example? Are they, do they have the adequate resources to be able to ensure that these rights are protected? So most of the time you'll find civil society, Black Defenders Coalition, will be pushing to ensure that if its funding is adequate. For example, the Kenya National Commission of Human Rights, do they have the requisite resources, and especially both financial and human, to be able to ensure that, given their task of ensuring the safeguard and protection of these particular rights in this country, is it happening? When you look, for example, at IPOA, for instance, they're supposed to be investigating a lot of all these issues we talk about, police brutality. Do they have the resources to do it? And so for us, it's basically to call out the government, most especially, to be able to ensure that these particular institutions, this particular organizations, so to speak, are adequately funded. Because when they're weakened, then at the end of the day, violations will occur, and the redress will be very minimal and near zero. What else we do is we utilize not only national spaces, including courts if we need to, but also utilize regional and international mechanisms. Regional being especially the African Commission of Human and People's Rights. I usually have ordinary sessions through the entire year. For this year, they'll have 4 sessions, right? So, and especially for that, to utilize this space now to be able to clearly highlight the human rights situations in the country, right? When you go to the commission and then you present your statement, the statement can be adopted and recommendations made. Last year, unfortunately, during the commission sessions, we ourselves had been present at the commission sessions and wrote a very clear statement of the situation of human rights in the country. Unfortunately, but of course the commission cannot be compelled, they did not pick up the recommendations, and appreciating the situation Kenya was in last year between, remember, in March with the floods, and then what that translated to in terms of other socio-economic rights, and then also the issues of enforced disappearance, extrajudicial and abductions. We can utilize international spaces, and the Universal Periodic Review before the Human Rights Council is another thing that is actually very important. Kenya is coming up for review this year in May. Before the Human Rights Council, despite it being a member of the Human Rights Council. And so that also presents an opportunity for civil society organizations, especially during the pre-sessions, usually take place a month, at least two months before the actual review is actually conducted, to be able to also paint a very clear picture of the human rights situation in the country. When the country itself, when they do their state reports and you read that state report, you might think you live in a utopia. Everything seems to be working, we're putting in place these policies, we're putting in place these particular measures, and then tomorrow you wake up, everything will be okay. But that's not the actual situation. So we have to utilize all these spaces, all these mechanisms, because at the end of the day, when it comes to advocacy, it's driving change, and we believe change is achievable.
I mean, Wallace, it will sound crazy, but I think that, and you can stop me if I'm wrong, but a lot of organizations that operate in this space, and I think if it's beyond dealing with a resource issue, if you want to look at IPOA, for example, give me one example. We can talk about resources until, the cows come home. But give me one example over the last 10 years where a case has been prosecuted, where an officer, for example, has been brutal against a citizen, and all the evidence is pointing, but one case where this has happened, 2 cases, 3 cases where this has happened, and with regularity. So I almost refuse to imagine that it is a resource issue beyond a goodwill issue. When we talk about dealing with rights, it's not as though we're dealing with your food and bread and butter situation. So do we have a resource issue when it comes to dealing with human rights? Or do we have a desire and will issue when it comes to dealing with human rights.
I agree. I will agree and say it's to me it's both, right? And of course, goodwill is very important because when you have laws in place, for example, then it will be the goodwill of say, for example, if it's the nation to be able to ensure the state, for example, to ensure that these particular rights are safeguarded. But this is a resource issue as well, because when we look at, for example, IPOA, and I'm not here to vouch for them, but to answer your question, they're supposed to equally to carry out investigations, and especially when it comes to issues of police conduct and misconduct. And then you find they always they're not adequately funded. Then that would hinder their operations. But also beyond the resources, then it will be how then can they continue to operate, ensure that they safeguard these rights beyond resources.
Sorry, can I interject?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm insisting that it is a goodwill issue.
It's
because if you
issue.
set up IPOA,
Yeah.
you set up the independent policing authority, and then you don't fund it.
Yes.
Not because you cannot, but that you do not.
Exactly.
That to me is that you're actually not interested in making sure that police officers actually don't abrogate the rights of Kenyans. Because if you were, then you would fund it. Do you see what I'm
Exactly.
saying?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not a resource issue. It's a
Exactly.
goodwill issue from that level.
Exactly.
Whereby you have an entire authority that has
Yeah.
been set up. It doesn't do
Yeah.
squiddly did
Yeah.
to make sure that this thing is actually done.
It's what I spoke about earlier in terms of weakening, institutions, and that's one of the ways they actually do it. So you find the institution is well set up, as statutorily and everything else, but then of course at the state level, that's where the goodwill comes in. Because, and I agree with you, if you are deliberate about ensuring that human rights and freedoms in your country are safeguarded, one of the things that you need to do is ensure that all these institutions and mechanisms available are adequately resourced to ensure that they can be able to issue redresses where violations occur. Goodwill also will come in the part of ensuring that beyond the resourcing and all the required measures are to be taken to ensure that they function adequately. So the issue of goodwill, now we'll trickle back to what I talked about, weakened institutions. And they're very deliberate about it, and I'll agree with you, it's very deliberate. Because even if you take an example, for example, you have a company and you have people who are working there and you're not paying them adequately, probably you refused to withhold the salary for a very long time, they will not function as they're supposed to function. Right? So it's the same thing with these institutions. If they're adequately resourced and you actually give them the proper leeway to be able to do their work very well, we'll not be having this conversation. And I agree with you. It's an issue of goodwill. And then when you come now to the prosecution aspect of it as well, it's unless a case is really, really pushed, and especially when it comes to police brutality, you find that they don't go anywhere. And a good example is for the late Willie Kimani. It took effort from civil society, Law Society of Kenya, to actually see that these particular police officers were found guilty and were sentenced. But how many other Kenyans are brutalized and cannot be able to access these remedies? How many will be able to go to, say, for example, come to us as a coalition or go to LSK and say, our rights were violated, how can we be redressed? And you'll be surprised when you interact with, Kenyans, ordinary Kenyans, day to day, they'll tell you their rights were violated. Especially each and every Kenyan can tell you of a right which was violated to them, but with no redress. Right? So are there structures in place? They are. Do we have adequate, is there goodwill to have them functioning properly? No, there isn't. And the Kenya National Commission, for example, as a mechanism, and its core mandate is to ensure that the rights and freedoms are safeguarded. And they'll tell you every single day when a new budget is being read, their fund is reduced.
Okay.
What does that mean to the commission? They'll try their best. But again, also we have to go back to appreciating that they need to be.
It's not a priority.
To them, it's not a priority.
Can the citizens play any role
Yes.
in getting this will upped? Because right now, from the way we're going about our discussion, it's at rock bottom. How, if they can, would the citizens play a role? Because the rights we speak of are the rights of the citizens.
Yeah.
So how do citizens understand and with the understanding act upon ensuring that institutions that are set up for their benefit, because this is what it is for, actually get the requisite support? Because again, the support comes from their money, their taxes. Can citizens actually move this needle? Because right now it's not just stuck, it's on a downward movement. Can citizens help?
I think they really can. And I think one of the ways we can be able to engage the citizens to be able to take up this is we need to be able to have adequate civic education in this country.
Right.
And you'll be able to appreciate a lot of Kenyans do not appreciate like even this mechanism exists and what they exist for. It is only when somebody is faced with an issue that they'll come to appreciate the Kenya National Commission, for example, or IPOA, or even any other organization that is mandated to safeguard their rights and freedoms. And so after they adequately engaged, and this can be through barazas, can be through forums where each and every day have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
Once you have people who have adequate information about their rights and freedoms, and then you'll be able to tell them about the mechanisms that are in existence and how can this actually happen.
So then the question is, what then do they do with that after they've been adequately informed and they're aware? What do they do with that next?
Exactly.
Let's take a break and come back and say, okay, so this is what you then are able to do with it. And these are some of the results that you actually can see. And then I'm also curious, when Kenya gets graded for its human rights record, what happens? Do you sit at the back of the class? Do you sit and raise your hands up and kneel in the corner? Let's find out about what happens with that when we come back from this break. Wallace Ndero is our guest this hour, and we're looking at the crossroads that Kenya might be at on its human rights situation. Let's go to the break when we're imagining about biting into your favorite foods, hot or cold, and that you don't have to deal with any kind of tooth sensitivity. So is it a stone cold ice cream or a hot coffee? Whatever it is, remember that you don't have to imagine anymore. You can have it just the way you like it. And this is because Sensodyne is here to give you the ultimate relief from tooth sensitivity. How do we know that? Because it's the #1 brand recommended by dentists, and you don't have to worry, because you know what? A happy mouth is a happy mind. Sensodyne for tooth sensitivity relief and everyday oral health. Good morning.
Allah. To be education, and as it says, determining that they're educated. I mean, there is a disconnect.
Yeah, I think that's why I mentioned it. We use using the term civic education, but of course, its purpose is to be able to impart information, and we appreciate this information. Of course, cannot be able to impart it. All of it all at once, right? But we appreciate if somebody has a know-how of a particular thing, then it becomes a bit easier to be able to navigate through it. Then that might lead to people wanting to get more information about something. So if and especially you'll be surprised, Kenyans out here want to be informed, right? And you'll find people stopping you even on the way and asking you, there's something they said on TV about A, B, C, D. What does that even mean? They may not go into the depth of it, for example, to be able to be, like you mentioned, properly educated. And I agree with you, there's no that proper measure to say this particular person is educated, this particular person is educated. But having that information is very, very important, because that information now we believe will create a spiral effect where it's going to be now snowballing of you'd want to know more and more and more. And a good example is during last year's protest, Kenyans who thought were not aware of their rights were now, being found in situations where they want to know more about something, and you could see advocates going online or people with that particular information sharing it, in bits for them to be able to appreciate. So what happens after this? So information is very important, and for me, information is power.
Yeah.
We may talk about civic education because that's the term usually used mostly in this particular space, but it's all about sharing information, and it's relevant information, not just information for the sake of sharing information. And so once we appreciate when they have this information, how then do they use it is a question, right? You now have an informed people. So these are people who are going to be able to appreciate when rights are when things are not working, when things are going wrong. If it's a right that is being violated, how is it being violated, and who is violating it, and what's the redress mechanism? If it's these institutions, how then can we galvanize ourselves together to be able to ensure that this particular institutions are adequately resourced to be able to work?
When you educate or when you pass on knowledge, for instance, do we tell our citizenry that when you fight for your rights, you will be fought back?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me take you back to the time when we had a president called Daniel Arap Moi. It was a single party state then. And there were people who opposed that party directly.
Yes.
And some of them they were members of the party because there was only one party anyway.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, what they stood for were the very things you're talking about. Rights. Not very popular then. But what was the demonstration that people had understood? They kept being voted in. So their people had understood what these people are doing makes perfect sense, and we will supported. Okay?
Yeah.
When we look at June 25th, a watershed moment for this country. The Gen Z had got it.
Yeah.
They had actually got it. They had understood, our rights are being violated here. And these old fogies don't seem to be doing anything about it.
Yeah.
So let's
Sure, I think what's
let's make a statement or so. They understood it over time.
Yeah.
Now, that was the beginning of them understanding what their power citizens are.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, when we continue with this, I'm still stuck on that knowledge and education. See, there is knowledge which brings you power.
Yeah.
And then with power comes responsibility.
Definitely.
Okay? Because sometimes this is lost.
Yeah.
And the quarrel we tend to have with those in leadership and power is that this responsibility bit, they don't seem to get. Yes.
Definitely.
We give you our money and you just do what you like with it. And we're telling you, we want you to do this. This is what we agree.
Daily Nuggets with Z.